Welcome, we're going to learn how to can peaches today, and the first part of canning peaches is my favorite part, sterilizing the jars. So I do this with hot soapy water. I guess let's get started. I use these pasta jars, they're reusable. If you ever see this particular tomato sauce, there's some great flavors, and once you're done you can take the labels off and you get jars that you can actually use to can your preserves. You can't use this original lid. You have to buy new rings and new lids. I'll show you how those look. So you can get these Bernardin, it's the brand I use, and you get 12 rings, 12 lids, which allows you to repurpose 12 of those pasta jars. I've already taken the labels off and given them a pre-wash, but I wash them again just to make sure they're completely sterilized. So let's quickly do that. I save the lids so that I can use them to cover my interim jars before they go in the canner so that fruit flies and dust and stuff don't get into it. Make sure you get all the soap out. Nothing worse than opening up a can of jars and digging into them in the middle of the winter and having them taste vaguely of soap. Okay, we got all the jars washed. Also make sure your kitchen is sterilized. Do all your soapy water stuff before you start handling fruit. You don't want any chance of cross-contamination of your dish soap into your fruit, and it has happened to me in the past where I have had a dish of, or a sink of soapy water next to a sink of fruits I was preparing, and I unplugged the soapy water and it bubbled into the fruits, and they all just taste vaguely like soap after you can them, and nobody likes that. So make sure you're done with all of your soapy water stuff, your whole kitchen is sterilized and clean before you start handling fruits. So I've got all the jars and the lids washed, all my dishes are done, all of my counters are clean. So now I'll show you how I start prepping up. The first thing you want to do is get your canner full of hot water. So let's do that. I store mine with a paper towel in there so this guy doesn't rust against the bottom of the pot, which, as you can see, maybe happened once. And then the best way to go about this, put those where the handles of your pots are, and then we want to fill it to water so it's just below that surface of the metal there. And I use hot water. So you can see the water is just below the surface. You don't want it over the top of that, because later when we put the jars in to hot water, if you put colder jars into boiling water, it'll blow the bottoms off. So you want the water just below where the jars are going to sit in that thing. And on the topic of blowing the bottoms out of jars, I have a gas stove over there. That gas heat is good for heating up water. However, due to the thinness of the pot, once you put the jars down, that flame right against the bottom of the pot can also blow the bottoms out of jars due to over temperature on the bottoms. So what I do is an extra step. I actually use a pizza sheet underneath the canner such that there's a bit of an air gap. So I've got this thing, just your standard pizza sheet. There's this little gap here, so I set this edge down on the burner, and you can see how charred that is from times past I've used it. And then I put the pot in here, so there's like, I don't know, half a centimeter gap. Just prevents the flame from directly contacting the metal of the pot, which blows up jars. So I put this on the burner like that, and then I put that big pot on there. Like that, and I try to have it level, make sure it's centered. And now we're just going to leave that because we have a lot of prep work to do, but I put this lid on here so I don't lose too much heat. What I do next is I get my stock pot ready. There's my stock pot. It's pretty big. It's got a nice Teflon coat and a thick bottom. I found I used a thin bottom stock pot, and sometimes I char my fruit and you get like little burned flakes in your fruit. Nobody likes that. If it's been in the cupboard a while, like mine has, you want to rinse it. I don't know if you can see that, but there's like a little bit of sawdust from the drawer over top raining down on it, so I just rinse them out so you don't can some sawdust or dust. That's going to go on that burner, and then I have just a little pot here, a little sauce pot. I'll be using this to sterilize my lids later. I'll show you that later, but for now I'm just going to put like half a pot worth of kind of filtered clean water in there and just let it sit on the back of the stove. Just enough so it's going to cover the lids, so about half full. Today we're going to be doing this box of peaches here. It's about 20 pounds. I'm told that they're freestone. Clingstone you can also can, but they're a huge pain. But what I like to do is take the peels off, because nobody likes eating peels in your canned peaches. And there's actually a real easy way to do it, involving hot and cold water. Hey look, I've got a little friend helping. Basically we're going to boil water, and we're going to use one of those sinks there to give them the hot bath. So the first thing you do is turn on the hot water and heat that bottom of your drain up really hot. If you don't do this, when you pour in the hot water, it will leak. So you'll come back after 5 minutes and you'll find you have peaches in an empty sink. You don't want that. Heat up the bottoms so they're both hot. Put that in there like that. Meanwhile, let's get some kettle water going. Okay, so you want to fill the bottom of the sink with one layer of peaches, and you want to start with the stems down. That one's a bit rotten, but we can salvage it. If they're super green, you should set them to the side. That one there is a bit iffy. If they're super green, they're hard to peel. You can still use them, but it's better to use ripe peaches. So there we go, we have a full sink. Alright, our first kettle is boiled. So try to get a little bit on all of them. Then you need 2 kettles usually to cover them. So get your next kettle going. What you want to do is you want to get the whole peach covered. I start with stem down because it's easy. I use a spoon, I'll show you. Kind of like that. And I'll use it, because the boiling water is pretty hot, to just flip them over so stems are up before I put the next kettle in. We can start doing our setup for all of our cutting that we're going to be doing. Of course you'll want a cutting board. I like this cutting board because it's got a well. Things get kind of juicy and sloppy, and it's nice to not have liquid running all over the counter and onto the floor. So let's put that down there. I compost my waste, so it's going to be our compost bucket in there. I'm left-handed, so I like using this very simple serrated steak knife because it cuts straight. Fun fact, most knives cut curved for left-handed people. Like a bowl to collect all my peaches as I'm peeling them, and again, like any other dish I pull out of the cupboard, I like to give it a quick rinse so there's no foreign materials. Another bowl to collect pits, because I don't necessarily like pits in my compost. I have a separate compost for pits, where I actually try and grow seedlings. And then I've got another bowl for when I slice my peaches. Okay, there's a couple more tools that you'll need, and you'll get them if you buy the canning set that comes with that big canner pot over there. So one of them is this funnel that you can set in the jars, so that when you're spooning your stewed peaches in, you're not getting as many all over the counter and on the floor. Real handy to have. Fits inside a standard 70 ml top jar. You've got these things. And I'll show you how these work later, but they're for grabbing extremely hot jars out of the canner without burning your fingers. And then we've got this doohickey. It's actually got a magnet, and it's for when I boil the lids to sterilize them. They are super hot, so you can like pick up the lids without having to touch them. I use a scoop for when I'm gonna scoop my peaches into the funnel, and a stirring spoon to stir my peaches as they're simmering so they don't stick to the bottom of the pot. Okay, there's our next kettle of water, so let's turn them over so stems are up. And I don't know if you can see on there, you can kind of see the water line on these peaches where they've been heated on one side already. So once you got all the stems up, pour your next kettle of water in. And they should be just covered. You can see some of them are trying to rotate on me. I don't like that. I like to get both sides evenly roasted, but and then I let them sit there for about, I don't know, 5-10 minutes. If you start to see the water discolor, it's definitely time to pull the hot water. Otherwise, they start leaching their juices into the water and you end up with kind of tasteless peaches. All right, those peaches have been in there for about, I don't know, 7 minutes. So the next step after they've had the hot bath is to give them a cold bath. But that plug is very hot to pull out, so here's a trick. Run the cold water over the drain for a few seconds so you get a column of cold water, and then you can pull the plug without boiling your hand. And then just cool them right down till they're not steaming anymore. And what this does is this makes them easier to handle as you cut them and peel them, but also it contracts them slightly, so it makes the skin slide off easier. Make sure your hands are clean. And then what I like to do is make sure you get the stem out. And then I start at the bottom. And if you did it right, and if you have nice peaches, you should be able to take off nice chunks of skin like that. Give it a quick rinse. Oh, get the stem out of there. This one's a bit greener, so it's not peeling quite as easy, but still not too bad. Make sure you get all the little bits. Any little bits you miss will surely be complained about by the people who freely eat your peaches. Anytime you see a blemish, now, like that guy right there, now's the time to just clean it up a bit. You only want to can the high-graded fruit. Here's that one I remarked was a bit rotted up top. So don't worry about taking too much, worry about taking not enough. But that should be good. Let's just take that pit out of there now. It's always a pleasure when one peels so nice and easy like that. Some people really obsess over a perfect peel and a perfect looking fruit. I don't. I'm going to stew mine anyway, which really softens them up. And since I compost all my waste, I don't worry too much about taking off too much. It's better than not taking off enough. These are fairly good peaches so far, though. I have only had the one I had to chop the top off of. And they're peeling really quite nicely. Now we're going to slice all those peaches up, and it's a lot easier than you think. especially if I've had some peaches where the stone breaks inside the pit, and those are really a pain because you want to get all the little bits out. Otherwise, again, people complain that it feels like they broke their tooth. These ones, though, I hope the pits are good, and if they are, if the pits stay together, you can like cut them really fast. I'll show you how. So what you do is you grab a peach, hold it in the palm of your hand with the original stem facing up, do a cut like that, and just leverage against the pit like this. And just make sure that we didn't have a shattery pit, no foreign crunchy bits. That's looking pretty good. So now they oxidize fast, so I want to cut fast. But I cut lightly too, just in case that pit does let go on me. If you cut really aggressively, you'll end up with pit for sure. So a light touch by the time you hit the core. Just go around the peach. Here's that one we took the top off. I want to try a taste just to make sure that it's not funky tasting. It's okay, we got all the rot off and it's a nice sweet peach. It's not going to make our whole batch taste rotten, so go ahead and slice that in there. Okay, so now we have this bowl full. Here's my stock pot arrangement. Take the lid off there. Whoops, water came out. So as you can see, we have about half a pot ready to go. At this point, I like to put in half a cup of honey. Peaches are already pretty sweet, but adding a half a cup of honey just really seals the deal. I'm pretty blessed. We've got this local honey here. It's alfalfa clover blossom. Works really good with peaches. And I take half a cup of that and try and get as little as possible on the bucket, and then put that in there. After I got most of the honey out, I just set that in there and set it off to the side. Now you'll see that we've got like kind of a third of a pot of peaches here with some honey on them. Stir them up so that it's all homogeneous. And you do not have to add water. In fact, don't add water, because if you add water, you'll end up with a whole bunch of peach juice, and that's what you want. But peaches and honey will make enough liquid on their own that you don't need to add water. So I put my stove, mine's a gas stove, but I put it on maybe a 4 or 5, well, a 4 for now, because I'm still slicing and I want these to get started but not too far ahead of the rest of my peaches. Cover that up, make sure she's centered. The reason I pre-stew them is if you can these without pre-stewing them, you'll end up with what I call a float. So you'll finish your jars, you'll look at them in the morning to check their seals, and you'll see that you have peaches filling half the jar and a bunch of like peach juice on the bottom, and maybe even a gap of like an inch at the top, because the peaches will absorb some of that water, and so you'll be left with, you know, half a can of peaches, or half a jar of peaches, half a jar of juice, and, you know, some cubic centimeters of air. If you pre-simmer these, I don't boil them, I just simmer them with the honey. It allows them to uptake all the fluids, and they won't absorb as much when they're boiling, and also they'll shrink a little, and it ends up that you'll have less float that way. You'll get more peaches per jar because they're slightly shrunk and they're a lot softer. Important to make sure you keep stirring these. But you can see already that those peaches are making their own juice, so you do not have to add water. And just stir those new peaches in with the original ones that are starting to warm up. I like to have them all kind of homogeneously cooked. So I'm a composter. I like to compost this stuff, even this leftover peach residue. Let's throw that in the compost. And I'll show you what I do with pits in the compost, in case you're interested. Oh, we have another little friend out here. And another one. I don't know why all the cats come to my house. Alright. It's my garden this year, well, part of it. So here you can see my compost, and it's interesting because I got all these things that have volunteer grown out of it. Throw that stuff on there. For the pits, I like to throw them somewhere separate. I've been throwing them here. You can see some in there. And these saplings that you see growing out of there are actually peach trees. Which is quite amazing. Didn't know you can grow them from seeds, so sometimes I take them out of there and put them in their own pot, like that guy. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. Maybe I'll make like an orchard someday, who knows. So all the while, make sure you keep checking back on this, see how she's simmering there. That's how I like them all to be eventually. Stir them up so they cook evenly. These should be getting close to done. That's what I like to see, just a light simmer like that. And they all kind of turn mostly a uniform color, which is kind of nice. And as you can see, you didn't need to add any water, you got plenty of juice. So it's time to start putting this in jars. I'm going to turn the heat right down. Those jars I cleaned before, I give them another rinse with hot water, just to really make sure I don't have any residual soap. So I put this funnel in the top of the jar, like that. And then I take my scoopla, I take the pot and nudge it right close so the jar and the pot are touching for less sloppage. And then aim for more fruit and less liquid. Again, you can drink all the water you want melting snow in the winter. You don't need to can water. When I have it just about to the top of that jar, I like to take a spoon, just gently squish all the air bubbles out the side of the jar. And then now we add just a little bit of water, or juice in this case, to top it up. And you want to make sure that you have a configuration like this. So if you look at this jar, you'll see that my liquid is kind of right to here. Ouch, that is very hot. With a bit of an air gap up top. Then what I do is those lids I saved earlier, I just set one on top because I don't like flies and stuff getting into these when I'm prepping them up. I have to do 4 for a full load. And then I just set this off to the side. And then keep filling jars. Take that spoon and squish out the air bubbles. You kind of want to have a little bit of liquid on top. You don't want to have bare fruit up top. Because when you open them, if you have bare fruit up top, it's oxidized. People think it looks rotten. It's actually good, it's okay. But if you have a bit of water over top or a bit of juice over top, it just lends a nicer aesthetic appeal when somebody opens the jar. Let's put one of those temporary lids on. Not quite a full jar there, but we're going to chop up more. Putting the lids on these not only keeps particulates out, but prevents them from oxidizing on you if you end up with a well, we do have some waiting and also a partial like this one. So here's our lineup so far. We've got just about 5 jars off of our first sink, which isn't bad. They are smaller jars, but I almost like these. They're great to give away, and more than enough for like a family of 4 to have breakfast with oatmeal, or just straight up as my daughter does. Get that column of cold water going so you don't scorch your hand. Pull the plug. I leave the plug there, just not plugged in, so that things don't go down my drain and clog my sewer. And then just hose everything down until nothing's steaming no more. If you don't have a sprayer nozzle like this, it's perfectly acceptable to just fill the sink with cold water. I don't like to do that because it draws even more of the flavor away from the peach. Some people use ice water. It's not necessary. There's an argument that it makes them even easier to peel, but I'm having not a hard time today just with this method. Here we have a pit that is split. So you have to be really careful that you don't get pit residue on the edges. If you get a whole box of these, it's a real pain. See, they split in half and you get, where are we? It's kind of like an almond in there. I don't think I'd eat it though. Then just scan through your cut pile and just make sure there's no little hard edges you missed. This crate's been pretty good, but I've had some in the past that every peach is like this. Alright, round 2. I don't bother to rinse the pot. There's some nice honey syrup in there still. Stir that honey in so it's all mixed. And let's turn the heat back on so let's start stewing. Okay, so somebody said you can actually reuse these, and if you look at them, they do have the sealing surface. I have heard about people reusing these lids instead of buying new ones. I tried it once, and of the 8 I canned, 3 of them failed, so they sounded like that in the morning after they'd cooled. So if it sounds like that, you can't put it in the cupboard, it's going to rot on you. More alarmingly, 2 later failed months later. When I pulled them out of the cupboard, they had de-sealed themselves. So yes, you can reuse these lids, but no, I do not recommend it. I guess in a pinch you could try, but 50% failure rate's kind of expensive with the cost of fruits and the cost of your time for doing this. Might as well just buy the proper lids. Alright, so that is 8 jars filled. As you can see, I've got peaches left over. I'm intending to do another batch, like another round, so I'm going to be using those, but you'll often end up with like some left over. Just put them in a bowl or a jar in the fridge, and they're great for a week if you refrigerate them. Great for snacks, great for adding to your breakfast cereal or porridge. I'm going to prep the jars for their hot boiling bath. which will allow us to seal them. So you can see I have 8 jars there ready to go with the temp lids on. What I like to do, since no matter how careful I am, I always get a bit of sticky juice on the side of the jars. I like to just take a wet cloth, just give them a quick wipe down. That stickiness will actually bake on there in the canner, and then get sticky jars in the cupboard, and I don't know. I just think it's a pretty easy preventative thing to do for having a cleaner cupboard and less chance of jars, you know, sticking to places and then people try and pick them up and then they didn't realize they were stuck and they knock them over and break one. I mean, it's just a nice finishing touch. Pro tip here, some of these jars are pretty hot, so if you use a cold cloth, it's a lot easier on your hands. Alright, so now that we got the jars cleaned up, it's time to take a look at the lid situation. So I've got these, I think I showed you earlier, these Bernardin, they come with the snap lid and the bands. Every year you have to use new snap lids, I recommend. Some people try to reuse, but you end up with fails that way. The bands you can reuse for a long time, unless they get dented or too rusted. So usually you can get like smaller pack of lids. They come in this smaller package. They're really hard to find this year, especially the 70 millimeter I need for these jars. They come in different sizes, so make sure you get the right ones for the kind of jars you're using. And then just lids like that without the indent, they're fresh. We're not going to use these today because they're very precious. I can't find any in town. But since we're going to have reused jars, we need new rings anyway, so I'm going to use these. And when you open up this guy, you'll see a combo like this. So you have those lids I showed you earlier, fresh, and a new ring. So what I like to do, or what you must do, we're going to count out 8 of these. I'm going to put the rings in there for now so that I don't lose them or drop them. And these guys, you need to sterilize them, and also preheating them softens this wax rubberized seal here such that you have odds of getting a better seal. So don't just put them on straight out of the box. What I do is I grab a small pot and I put filtered water in there, and then put these lids in there. Pay attention though, you'll see why. Put it so that the rubberized side is up on your first one. And then for the next one, go the opposing direction. And then the opposing direction again. Then the opposing direction again. And again. And again. How many is that? 6. We need 2 more for this batch. Again. And again. So what you should end up with is all your lids just below the surface of the water. In fact, I'm going to add just a little bit of water there. And the reason why I've put them in opposing like that, let's get a better look. It should look kind of like that. If you get 2 on top of each other in the same direction, they're almost impossible to pry apart once you've heated them and cooled them. I mean, you can, but it's not fun. So if you do them opposing like this, they have less chance of sticking together than if they're side by side. So after you have those in the pot, put them on the stove and put them on the highest setting or next to the highest setting, and bring them to a good rolling boil for about 30 seconds. So here we are, we got our lids in there and the water. Make sure the water's in. I boiled them once without the water and that was terrible. My whole house was filled with smoke. And then just crank her. As you can see my flames kind of maxed there. And keep a close eye on them. You don't want to overboil them, or that inner seal, that rubberized sort of waxy thing, will start to flow off the lids. You'll destroy them. So you only want them to hard boil for about 30 seconds. If you do it for like 10 minutes because you forgot, you should probably just throw them out and get new lids, because you'll have very many fails with your seals. Actually, while those are boiling, what I do is I go back to these jars and I take some paper towel, piece of paper towel, and I fold it. Maybe I can even fold it square. Fold it. I fold it. And then I wet it with some water. So it's wet like that. Maybe I even fold it again. So I've got a wet, clean surface. And what I do is just kind of wipe down the top surface on each jar. And don't put these lids back on or you'll gunk it up again. So it's sort of the last thing you do before you almost have your lids ready. You don't want any contaminants here. It will also prevent you from getting a seal. Here we go. We did not bad. Sometimes you see a lot of peach residue on there, but this time I don't see much orange. We must have been very careful. And these lids you can now discard, or you can save them if, I guess you can use them for other things. With these guys, since they're new, straight from the factory, I'm just going to rinse them with hot water. Alright, these have been boiling about 30 seconds. Should look like that. Turn them off. Drain the water. Okay, it's getting exciting. So now we got our lids in the pot, all opposed, instead of stacked one on top of each other on one thick wad. So we're going to use that magnetic scoopy thing and put one on each jar. That was this guy. Now you can just pick them up. See how I got two? But at least they're opposed, so they're easy to pull apart. If they were stuck together, they're so miserable. Let's put them on the jars. Now what you want to do is make sure they're all kind of centered. You don't want them like off center. That can cause problems with sealing, so you want them as close to center as you can get. And then take your rings and keeping that thing on center. Sometimes it helps to go back a little, then go forward and make it snug, but don't reef on it, don't make it loose, just snug. Also be careful not to splash or wiggle the jars too much, because if you get fruit up on the seal, it can make it so they don't seal properly, or up on the rim, they won't seal. So handle your jars gently, keep them level, try not to clink them together. If you put on these rings too loose, they won't seal. If you put them on too tight, sometimes the lids will crease because they need to let a bit of steam off when they're brewing or when they're boiling. And also people have an incredibly hard time taking them off if you reef them on. And sometimes you can actually strip them too, so you reef it too hard and then you skip a rim, and then of course it's not going to seal either. So now that we have all those lids on, it's crucial that we get them into the hot bath immediately. You don't want them to prematurely seal on you, which they will do if you leave them like that long enough, especially the ones we just dished out. So here's that water I poured earlier, and as you'll notice, it's not very hot, and the reason for that is if you put cooler jars in boiling water, they will crack, they will shatter. So I've just been basically keeping that water warm, but it's not super hot. And so now what I do is I load in the jars start with a handle. You want to keep balance so that they don't all pitch on you and smash on the floor. I've had that happen. Whoops. Try not to clang them. Okay, once you got most of them in, and again, try not to clink them too much. You might have to rearrange them a bit to get the last one in. Of this size jar, I can do 8. Different size jars, sometimes you can only do 7. Okay, once I have them all like that, I put this lid back on. I don't lower them into the water yet, and you can see I got a bit of a gap there. I turn up the heat a little because I want the water to start steaming, and I kind of want the steam from the water and the heat of the jars to equalize. So I do this for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes if the water was hot from a previous batch. Again, because if you change the temperature of glass too fast, it will shatter, and that is quite a mess to clean up and quite annoying and expensive. Alright, it's been about 10 minutes, so it's time for hope and pray. Now to lower these in, you take these 2 handles, kind of lift, squeeze them in, and very slowly lower them into the water. Now you kind of want the water to be about, I don't know, an inch over the top, so I need to add a bit. That should do it. You don't want it too full or you'll have water splashing out the top. So nothing has broken, nothing has shattered, that's a good sign. Now it's time to cover these, and I'm going to put up the heat a bit higher. I don't want to go, like, obviously we need to get them to a boil and we'd like to do it rapidly. If you do it too rapidly, the heat on the bottom of the pot will heat up the bottom of the jars and cause them to blow at the bottom. I did put on that pizza tin earlier, which should help alleviate that problem, but I still don't go max temperature here, maybe 6 or 7 on my gas stove. Alright, it took about an hour at my low temperature, but we've got a rolling boil. So now I let them do that for 20 minutes. Alright, 20 minutes are up. Let's turn the heat right down to minimum. It's pretty hot, so I use a towel to open it. And yeah, this part's scary, but believe it or not, the metal handles here are not as hot as you might think, so you kind of like grab them, kind of hang them like that. And let's get them out of there. Again, when you're unloading, you don't want to bang the jars too much, and you want to keep your balance. I'm going to try and do this right-handed just so that I have a better camera angle. I like to tip the water out of the top. And I set them on a towel next to a window here where they can cool fast. Faster cooling promotes a better seal. I'm just going to rearrange them a bit because I don't want anything tipping over on me. And there you have it, that's most of the work done. Now there's our jars, looking pretty good. Let's get a close-up. As you can see, there's not much float. There's fruit all the way to the bottom, which is the advantage of pre-cooking them. That one there, it's not too bad either. Yep, they're looking good. So I've got them spread out so they can cool. I'll open that window so they can cool even faster. And then I leave them sit undisturbed until morning, at which time I'll check the seal and label them if they have a good seal. Welcome back. Here we are the next morning. So the jars have had a chance to cool, and the first thing we want to check is whether or not they've sealed. And how you do that is you touch the top, and if you don't get any give on the lid, like if the lid is sucked down and you don't hear a sound, it means it's sealed. So good, 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 good. everyone's a winner. Full seals. Looking good. I've got fruit all the way to the bottom. I do have a little bit of a gap up top there. In retrospect, I could have stewed them a bit longer before putting them in the jars. That would have helped alleviate that. Looking at the next one. Again, we got fruit all the way to the bottom. A little bit of an air gap, not too bad. Fruit all the way to the bottom. A little bit of gap. And guys in the back are looking pretty good too. So all in all, I'd say this is a pretty successful canning experience. The final thing you want to do is label them so that when you find them in the cupboard later, you know what they are and what year they were made. So I take just a permanent marker. So these are peach, and it's 2020. There you go, some COVID peaches for you, I guess. These will keep for a year. I store them in the cupboard out of direct sunlight. You don't want them in the direct sun. That'll cause them to spoil faster. You kind of want them in a cool, dark place. So if you have like some shelves in your basement, you can put them on, or I just put mine in my cupboards. For 1 year, they're definitely good. I even have some jars that I find deep back in my cupboard that are a couple of years old, and quite often they're just fine. As long as that seal doesn't give way, just give them another test when you go to open them, and if there's no popping sound, the seal is still good. I've seen them last up to 3 years. I did have one jar that was about 4 years old. It started to discolor down, so I didn't trust that one. That was a good one for the compost, but yeah, all in all, a great way to preserve some tasty fruits for the middle of winter. Nothing quite like some honeyed peaches in the middle of winter to brighten your mood during those long, dark, cold days of winter. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the tutorial on how to make peaches. Good luck, and I'll see you next time.